Thanks for watching. My name is Blaine Bryant, and today I'm going to be talking about teaching and coaching your students effectively. And I'll illustrate the difference between an expert that knows how to teach and one that doesn't. Now, if you saw my last video, I talked about creating offers for your business and the process that we use to teach our students to create offers that have their prospects eager to get started. If you haven't seen that or any of my other videos, I encourage you to go and check them out. Now this week, I'll dive a bit into what's going to make a huge difference for your business, especially to your students, when you understand how to teach them your concepts effectively. Welcome to the BBE Social Media channel. My name is Blaine Bryant, Director of Marketing and Public Relations for BBE Social Media, and the creator of the Simplex OBA program that helps aspiring entrepreneurs start their own online business in just 30 days by simplifying online business architecture. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like below and consider subscribing to our channel and hit that notification bell so you'll never miss out on more videos like this one. Now, I want to start off this video by mentioning that in my previous video about internet gurus, I mentioned how there are some so-called experts out there that simply don't know how to effectively teach the concepts of their program in a clear, concise way. But what happens as a result is you end up with many questions from students trying to understand your course, or students that get frustrated and don't finish your course, or worst of all, students that ask for refunds and then blacklist your content as either not being useful or a scam. So today I want to dive a little deeper into what it actually means to teach effectively, so that if you're one of those people that has a hard time teaching others, you'll get a better idea of how to teach in the future so that you don't run into so many problems like confused students or even worse. So let's start with a very simple question. What process do I use to teach any concept to someone who has no previous knowledge of that concept? Now, from my own experience from teaching multiple students, co-workers, and even young adults, what's typically worked for me in the past to create a complete understanding in my students has always been what I call the top-down approach. Now, what this means is that I start with a clear picture of the end result, giving a general idea of what the complete process will look like to get to that end result, and then proceed to break it down for them into smaller, shall we say, bite-sized pieces, so they get a complete understanding of everything that goes into it. And just like my teaching style, I'm going to do that with this video as well. Now here's what a top-down approach will look like for your course. Start with a demonstration of the entire process and end results. Break down the individual steps that it takes to achieve those end results. Provide useful examples using either demonstrations or anecdotes to further illustrate the concepts and steps and why they're important. And then go back through your course content, asking yourself what information may be missing that you maybe take for granted, but your students will not. At the end of the course, you may want to do what I call a wrap-up that uses a story that summarizes what was taught and ties it back to the original demonstration of the overall end results. So let's say that I'm trying to teach my students something that I'm very good at, like, let's say, hammering a nail in straight without bending it in the process. Seems like a very simple concept, but so many people have a hard time doing this right if it's their first time or they're just not very experienced. So I would start with a very basic tutorial on how to hammer the nail in straight with a visual demonstration of what it looks like when done properly. So this gives the student an overall idea of what the end result will be when they get it right. From here, what I want to do is break down the specific techniques that come together to achieve that end result, making sure that I don't leave out any tips or tricks that might help beginners when they're trying it for themselves. Now here's what that looks like. Let's say to begin, I want to first go over the type of hammer I'm using, the proper technique for holding and swinging the hammer, and maybe some tips on getting a good hammer of their own for a good price that they can use for almost any project. And I will demonstrate those things while giving explanations of why getting this right will help them. Then I want to show them in detail what kind of nails I'm using, which ones work best for which projects, how to hold the nail properly to get it started going into the wood, and so on and so on. I want to offer up some tips on how to make sure you don't hit your thumb with the hammer and things like that. The obvious reason being, thumb safety. And then I want to show them how all of these techniques combine in detail to drive the nail into the wood so that it doesn't get bent along the way in. I want to demonstrate how the proper hammering techniques together with the proper way to hold the nail and getting it started into the wood all comes together so that hitting the nail squarely to drive it in without bending it and not deflecting off the nail head and hitting the wood, putting a dent in the surface. Lastly, I want to make sure that I'm teaching my students how to identify problems with their technique while they're learning it, and how to correct those things so that they get the proper technique mastered in the end. And perhaps how to use their hammer to properly pull the nails if they need to start over and things like that. Now, who would have thought that something as common as driving a nail could have so much to it? As a side note, for the sake of this video, yes, I did go and look on YouTube, and there are several videos out there on how to properly drive nails with a hammer that you can watch that give you proper tutorial, all kinds of tips and tricks, and things that you can learn to use it quickly. I'm serious, you can go look it up. The point I'm trying to make with this is that to an expert, breaking down all of the techniques he uses to drive nails with a hammer so effortlessly may seem simple to understand to him, but to a beginner may not be as obvious. And this is where some experts may run into problems teaching others their concepts, especially more complex ones. Now let me explain what that looks like. Going back to our hammering a nail tutorial, let's say an expert carpenter was trying to teach this, and instead his instruction was just like this. Alright, you take your hammer, you hold up your nail, and you hit it like this until it's all the way in. Easy, right? Now to him, because he's so experienced in what he's doing, that's all there is to it. He's left out so much information that a beginner would need to hammer in a nail as well as he can that he simply takes for granted now because he's done it so much. So now his students are asking him all kinds of questions, like, what kind of hammer are you using? Why use that kind of hammer and not another one? Can I just use any kind of nails, or are there specific nails for different types of projects? And how do I hold the nail so I don't hit my thumb every time? If the nail starts going in crooked, what do I do to fix that? Do you see what I mean here? And this is the difference between an expert that can teach and an expert that cannot teach. Now, if you think back, I'm sure you can relate this to a situation where you were trying to learn something from another person, and this was the level of instruction that you got. One where they made it look so easy, but you ended up having to ask a load of questions just to figure out what they were doing. And this is where you, as a teacher, need to make sure you're not losing your students. The main question you want to answer when you're putting together your course for someone else is, am I breaking this down into individual concepts or steps that I may take for granted, but a beginner may not understand? Now, going back to our top-down approach, this is exactly what you want to do to teach others your concepts effectively. You don't just want to demonstrate what to do, but how it's done, why it's done this way, and what are the minute details that go into it that a beginner may not know. So how do you know if you're not nailing this in your own teaching? It's a pretty simple answer. If you keep getting the same questions from your students to clarify certain things in your course, that's where you're falling short in your teaching. You may need to go back and reassess how you're explaining things, and again ask yourself what information you may have left out that you take for granted but your students do not. Or you can ask yourself if you should explain things in a different way with some sort of example that will make it easier for them to understand. And then modify your teaching so that it's more clear for your students. In the end, you want to make sure that your students are getting what they paid for. It's important to hold yourself to a higher standard of teaching because in the end, the more student success stories you can create, the more your course will sell. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this is something that I've run into before as well with other courses that I've purchased. They make it look so easy, and perhaps once you know everything to do and why you're doing it that way, it'll become easy for you too. But if they're leaving out the smaller details that they take for granted and it makes it harder for students that have no idea of what they're doing, they're not going to be able to fill in those gaps. Now let me give you one final example from my own past experience of why it's important to get this right with your own teaching in your own course. Now years ago I was training a team of men that I had hired as security system installers on how to make sure that all of their administrative paperwork was filled out and filed correctly using our online system. We'd been having many problems in our team with our admin not being filled out or filed correctly, or things not even being done at all. I found out from my team members that some of them didn't fully understand how to fill out the forms, how to file them online correctly, and some guys didn't even understand why it was so important that we do all of it, so they just didn't bother. So for our next training session, I let them know we would be going through admin thoroughly, and I would be making sure that everyone understood everything about it by the time we were done. I started that day by going through all of the admin forms that we needed them to fill out and what they looked like when filled in correctly. I showed them where in the online system they needed to upload these forms and how to label them. And then I broke it down for them step by step, form by form, what information was required, why it was important to make sure all these forms were filed online correctly, and then gave them some anecdotal illustrations of what could happen if we failed to have our admin done correctly. I went through with these men from start to finish about 3 times, but by the end of the 3rd walkthrough, these men were able to tell me what had to be filled in, where to file it, and why it was so important for them to get it right. One example from that session was a form we used that we filled out with our security recommendations for each customer during each install. The form was used to present several different options for the customer for how to get the best security for their home. Everything from the 100% fully secured option down to what we would recommend for them as a bare minimum based on what their home layout was like. Once they were done presenting these options to the customer, whether the customer decided to purchase additional equipment or not, we needed the customer to sign the form at the bottom acknowledging that the security consultant had gone over it with them in full detail. The installer would then take a photo with his phone of the signed form in its entirety and upload it to our online system in the customer's file with the label options. Why was this so important for them to do? Well, one guy said because the company wants to make sure we're actually doing this with each customer. Yes, that's true. It tells us that you're doing your job, but what else? Another guy comes back and says, well, because it lets the company know that the customer was fully informed of his options and either decided to only purchase a few things or none at all. Okay, so why is that so important? Because it's a liability issue for the company. If a customer has a break-in and the burglar got in through a door or window that wasn't protected, they can try to blame the security company saying that they weren't told by us that they should secure that door or window and that their loss is our fault. We have the form in our online system with their signature on it that proves what our recommendations were for full security all the way down to our minimum recommendations for their home. If at the time of install they opted out of purchasing additional equipment that would have secured that door or window, and we have proof of that, we're absolved of any liability from that decision on their part. That was the most important reason for them to get it done correctly. So what was the outcome from our training session that day? A short time later, I got an email from the head office saying that our team had been 100% error-free with our admin since that training session 3 weeks ago. Because of what our team had accomplished with just 1 day of training, I informed the guys that our next meeting was going to be fully catered with breakfast burritos and donuts for everybody. Now, during that meeting, I reinforced their good work, told them to keep it up, and answered any other questions that they may have had. Now later on, I shared what I had done with my team with other team leaders in the company so that they could get similar results with their own team members that were having similar problems. This top-down approach to teaching my students worked so well that I was able to achieve these results with just 1 session. And that's the difference between an expert that knows how to teach and an expert that does not. So I hope this video gave you a full illustration of how you can become the best teacher for your own coaching and consulting students as well. If you have any questions about this method, let me know in the comments below. Like I said, the more student success stories you can create with this method, the more your course will sell. And really, that's the best result for everyone. If you want to create and sell your own online courses, I encourage you to contact us about our Simplex OBA program, where we walk you through how to start your own online coaching, consulting, or teaching business in just 30 days using the same kind of teaching methods that I outlined for you today. Now, if you like this method, you're going to love our program. Imagine how much faster and better you'll be able to launch your new business when you get that kind of clarity from our instruction. Now, to reserve your spot in our Simplex OBA program, head over to simplexoba.com right now and book your discovery call. We'll get you well on your way. Until next time, my name is Blaine Bryant. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave your questions or comments below. I want to thank you for watching, and I hope we'll see you become one of our student success stories very soon.